Hey there, it's Jane. Thanks so much for stopping by. Today I'm going to show you how you can paint with your Perfect Pearls powder. It is a really easy way to add color to your cards and projects, so let's get started. I've been using Perfect Pearls for quite a few years now, and typically I put them on backgrounds, and I have a few videos that I can link to in the description below. But today I decided to mix some Perfect Pearls with water, grab a couple of background stamps that have some open areas, and just paint in some strategic areas. And I really love the way they came out. I love the shine, and I love the simplicity of creating these cards. I made a 5.5 by 5.5 card and a 4 1/4 by 5.5 card. So I dug through my stash and looked at my background stamps. I love the Simon Says stamp Flora. It came out a couple of years ago. So the beauty about the MISTI is you get to stamp and restamp over and over if your embossing powder and your Versamark ink do not adhere. So I put my stamp in my MISTI, and I put a little bit of temporary tape on the back of my cardstock so that I can line it up perfectly and centered in the middle of this large stamp. So there it is, perfectly centered in the center of this large stamp. So I put a generous coating of embossing powder on this because I knew I was covering a large stamp, and I used Versamark ink to create my impression. Versamark ink is a sticky ink, and your embossing powder will stick to your Versamark ink. Now I had to stamp this about 2 or 3 different times. Again, that is the beauty of the MISTI. And I rub it hard with my microfiber cloth or anything I have out there. Tim Holtz calls it giving it CPR, which I did have to give it a little bit of CPR in a few areas because you can see it did not cover. But after about 3 times, I believe it covered really well. Now, I love this Brutus Monroe Icicle embossing powder. It is just a clear embossing powder, but it is beautiful. It just adheres great. It has a great detail, and the shine is incredible. So I set that aside, and I decided to make my mix my water with my Perfect Pearls. I squirted just a little bit of water in these colored bowls that I have, and I added a generous scoop of Perfect Pearls. I love this Nouveau scoop. It has a fat end and a skinny end for those little jars. And I'm using the Perfect Pearls color. It's confusing. Perfect Pearls, Perfect Pearl. If you tap on the top, it does minimize the pearls flying out of the top. And I have a number 2 paintbrush that I love, and again I will link it in the either description below or in my blog post. And I'm just using that paintbrush to mix it up really well. And while I was mixing, my heat tool was heating up. I love a really hot heat tool. It minimizes the warping of my cardstock, so I have a little holder it sits in, and it's just pointing out in the air, and it's heating up. So as you can see, it melts really, really beautifully, and the detail is absolutely incredible. So what I do is I put my paintbrush in the bowl, mix it up because the pearls settle to the bottom, and then I scrape the edge off the edge of the bowl. And I have a little microfiber cloth there just for boo-boos. And you will see a boo-boo. I will show you how to fix a boo-boo. You can see I did not scrape it against the side of the bowl, so I have a little too much water on my paintbrush, and I don't like that blob. So what I do is I dry my paintbrush on my cloth, and then I take my paintbrush and pick up that extra. And then of course I use my fingernails to get it off where it's not supposed to be. The beauty about the walls of the embossing powder is it holds your paint, and it does not move into the other areas that you don't want painted. So you dip your brush, you swirl it around to mix it up, and then you scrape it on the edge of your bowl. And if you get in that rhythm, you will have the most amazing painting. You can see that this particular flower painted so much better than my first 2, because the first 2 I did not do the dip and the stir and the scrape. I guess I'm calling it the dip, stir, and scrape method. So I just strategically worked on this card. I should have started on the inside and worked to the outside, but I'm not smart like that. But here it is, finishing up, just figuring out where I want my Perfect Pearls to be. Do I need to add anywhere? And I zoomed in for you to see me painting. And then I forgot to zoom out, so the next couple of things are really, really close and personal. But I just love the way they came out. So then I grabbed this Simon Says stamp Emma, and I cut a piece of green cardstock, and I will link the color below to 6 by 6. And I put my Simon Says stamp grid transparency on top so I knew where to line up my Emma stamp. Did the same thing, close the MISTI, but in this particular one I had a 6 by 6 cardstock, so I lined up the stamp on that. I used my anti-static powder tool, and I put the Brutus Monroe Icicle embossing powder on top of this one as well. And while I'm doing this, my heat gun is heating up. I love these hot dog trays. I got them on Amazon. I don't know if they're still available, but you have to buy 1,000, so you might not want to use them. I don't even eat hot dogs, so I have a lot of embossing that I need to do. So I'm finishing up the embossing here. I'm looking at it, making sure that everything is melted properly. I just set it on top of my glass media mat. You really don't have to hold it. And then I'm putting some regular tape on the back, and I'm adhering it to this hardboard. It's just a cutting board that I bought, and that way the cardstock doesn't warp up. The beauty about creating more than one thing is that you learn from your first one. I learned from my first one that my cardstock will bow up a little bit, so I decided to adhere it down to the hardboard. And I learned from my first one that I need to start in the center and work my way around. The reason I adhere it to the hardboard is I like to turn it around so I'm not working, in the opposite direction that my hand likes to be. But if you don't have one, you could just adhere it to your work surface and just peel it up when you're done, and just maybe your hand works better than mine. I don't really know. But you can see that the wells hold in the perfect pearls. I'm doing the dip the brush, stir it, and scrape it on the side of the bowl method. And I just love the way this one came out as well. The shine of the embossing powder with the shine of the perfect pearls is beautiful. So let's turn these backgrounds into cards. So I went through my stash and I found this really cool like white glitter paper from Memory Box, and I will link it below. I'm sorry, I'm so zoomed in. I don't know what's going on here. So I cut a piece of cardstock out of that, 4 1/4 by 5 1/2, and I did not want to waste that beautiful cardstock. So I cut a rectangle out of the middle of it with my Hero Arts Infinity rectangles. And the card base is 4 1/4 by 5 1/2, and I'm using the Birch Press Big Joy Sugar Script die. I cut 1 out of the glitter and 3 out of white, and then I cut the shadow out of the vellum. And I just glued them all together to stack it up for a dimensional die cut, because this is the only thing that I'm going to be putting on my card. And I want to show you a little trick here. I put a little bit of glue on my work surface. You could use a piece of scrap cardstock, because it comes out way too thick for my cards, and I don't like that, especially when it goes onto vellum. And then, so when I cut out the center of this, I didn't want the dip in the card, so I just grabbed a piece of scrap cardstock from my stash, cut it to the approximate size, put that inside, and that way I have an even card. But I love to put a little bit of glue on my work surface and use my pokey tool, that's what I call it, or you can use a toothpick. And the beauty about liquid adhesive, it gives you a little bit of wiggle room. And if you have any extra, just scrape it off with your fingernail or a toothpick, and it will dry clear and no one will ever know that you messed up. I love to put something heavy on my projects as I'm working to make sure that they dry flat. And again, I'm putting a little bit of glue right on the vellum, but I don't want it to squeeze out, so I'm using my fingers to flatten it out and wiping my hands on my cloth so that I don't squish out on the vellum. And that's the finished card, putting something on top, letting it dry. I will show you that in just a second. Now, this is totally off camera, but what I decided to do was cut out this particular stamp set. And I love the fact that I did that. I just cut around the edges of the heat embossing. So I grabbed the same white glitter cardstock from my stash, and then I use this Simon Says stamp large written Merry Christmas die. It has become one of my favorites, and I think I'm going to go over today and make a few more cards with this particular die. I cut 3 out of white cardstock, 1 out of glitter, and I way overdid it with my foam tape. But I did not want this little image to squish in, so I thought, well, we'll more is better in this case. I put that Merry Christmas on top of the Vellum shadow, just like I did for the Joy, and I just love this card. So I want to show you that I also decorated the envelopes. I have a 6x6 white envelope in here, and I have my Simon Says stamp grid transparency on it to line it up, and I folded a piece of just typing paper, copy paper, and put it inside the envelope. I stamped it up with green. I think I had to do a couple of stamps here just to get it. You know, these big background stamps are sometimes hard to stamp. That's why the Misti's beautiful. And I did it a couple of times, and then I pulled out the magnetic bar, which I can't even pick up, and there is the matching envelope. I did the exact same thing with the other card, but I used this Simon Says stamp here. And one of my favorite ways to decorate envelopes is to just use Versamark ink. It looks like a watermark, and I just Versamarked this back of this envelope, did it a couple of times, and that I just love the way that came out. And here's the finished cards. So this card's 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. It has the Icicle embossing powder, a little bit of Perfect Pearls painting, and a very simple sentiment. And then here is the 5 1/2 by 5 1/2 inch card with the green cardstock. I wanted to put a little bit of cardstock in the middle so that you can write your message without having to have a white ink. And there's my finished card. So I hope you like this project. Perfect Pearls are very inexpensive. You can paint with color too. Thanks so much for stopping by. I really appreciate it. Enjoy.